Well, hello everyone. Chris here with the Perch Report. Been a minute since I've heard a little bit since I've been able to get a video out, which is okay. Life's definitely been busy, but hey, I'm excited. We've been talking about this for quite a while, actually. A few weeks and whatnot. And the thought was leading up to this is, when I did the first episode with Brian Gardner, saw a video of this guy, Mike with Barrie, who covers the Barrie Colts in the OHL, and thought that'd be kind of cool to kind of collaborate and do something together. Uh, once it got closer to playing the Barrie Colts on our schedule. So, Mike, welcome. How you doing?
It's quite funny how they made the schedule this year. We're used to seeing teams at least in the first half, and then maybe in the second half we get to see the other Western Conference opponents. But I'm not sure who planned it this way that we'd see Barrie and Flint play so close together in the month of January. It's a
Right.
long time coming, and I know you emailed me a while ago to talk about the Firebirds and Colts, and I'm so excited to do this. And it's I know you've got a newborn at home, and I've got three that run around my house, so I know how having kids is. It's quite it can be pretty crazy, but you're doing a great job.
Yeah, it definitely can be crazy. Lack of sleep is definitely real. Um, but to be honest, man, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, love the kid. Don't, and my wife, and I say this knowing my wife is in the room on the couch with our kid. Um, don't know if this will be our one and only or not, but so far life's great with the kid. And he's doing really good. So I'm glad he's finally home. So, um, but yeah, guys. So I reached out to him, like kind of like we both mentioned, kind of leading up to this, and it's kind of funny how you bring it up too, Mike, because when the schedule first came out, I know we have in Flint we have our rivalry cup with the Spirit, and there were quite a bit of games with them right away, like quick. I want to say, geez, like four or five, pretty fast, and I know it was a week or two ago. We had our sixth game with them out of eight, um, and now they're kind of starting to stagger and slow down. Our last one with them was in March. I mean, it's kind of how you. It's weird how it kind of played out to where you got teams in your side of the conference or the league, and how quickly you play them or you don't, and how things spread out, or it feels like it's not and it's close together. It's an interesting schedule, but hey, life isn't too bad for being a Firebirds fan this year. That's for sure. So yeah, you kind of cover the Barry Colts and stuff like that. Not kind of, but kind of give just an example of this, or like a brief like synopsis, or kind of what your experience is. I know if anybody has not followed him or does not follow this guy from the booth with Mike on YouTube, awesome material. Um, he's been putting out stuff like crazy, especially with all the trades and the with the OHL trade deadline and whatnot. So, um, but yeah, just kind of give your kind of like just a brief intro of like who you are and you know why you're so passionate about the OHL and the Barrie Colts, man.
Well, actually, I've been covering the Ontario Hockey League now since the 2007 2008
Hmm.
year, so that's 17 years ago, if my math's correct. So I've been covering the OHL for quite a while. Started off with the Niagara Ice Dogs out of college, and my whole goal going to school was to become a hockey broadcaster of some sort. Always wanted to do play-by-play, and just my journey took me to Niagara when the Ice Dogs arrived from Mississauga that first year, and we had a college radio show called the Not So Roundtable. So my buddy and I uh, held a bit of a talk show. So we had people call in, we talk about the Ice Dogs. So that's where I got my start. So I got my feet wet and ended up covering the Kitchener Rangers for a couple seasons. Ended up in Sudbury for 4.5 years doing the color commentary, and then 9 years ago got offered the play-by-play gig with the Barrie Colts. So just being involved and being around the game and broadcasting and media, it's just my passion. I just love being able to talk junior hockey. And 3 years ago, I decided, why don't I try a YouTube channel? So that's where From the Booth with Mike came from. And now we're actually broadcasting the Barrie Colts road radio games on YouTube. So it's something that has never been done before with the Barrie Colts. They've never had a proper radio broadcast. And We saw the void. So Gene Pereira and myself and Josh McCann, the three of us work together on the road broadcast, and can't wait to come down to Flint later this month.
I say, yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to that. You got some good games coming up here, and whatnot. Hopefully, you and I can kind of, link up and chat a minute before you get upstairs up to the booth and whatnot. But no, it should be a fun game. Um, so yeah, you kind of mentioned before. I mean, plus, I mean, if once anybody starts looking at your channel a little bit more, if they haven't heard of you or watched any of your stuff yet, one of the things you've really been covering lately, just overall, league wide, is the trade deadline. So, and you've had some great content. So, what, as far as maybe not so much league wide, I mean, kind of dibble a little bit into that, but I'm kind of curious of what your thoughts are, and how you felt about what the Barrie and Flint did as far as their trades, and how kind of how they set themselves up for the rest of the season.
Well, with junior hockey, it's all about the cycles. So you have your down years where you're rebuilding, you're
Yep.
plotting your future, you're building your base, your young talent. So once you're in that position, you take a couple of years to figure out, okay, when is it going to be our go for it year? And for the Barrie Colts, that was last year. They decided, okay, we're going to go all in. They had their opportunity. They had a good core with Cole Bodwin, Kayshawn Aitchison, Bo Jelsma, Sam Hillebrandt, net. So they decided to take a run for it last season, ended up going to the Eastern Conference Final and
Hmm.
falling short against the Oshawa Generals. So coming into this season, there were some question marks about, okay, what direction do the Barrie Colts go? Because you still have Cole
Right.
Bodwin, you got Kayshawn Aitchison, and Emil Hemming came back from the Texas Stars in the American Hockey League. So all signs were pointing that the Colts would likely buy at the trade deadline, but there's that uncertainty because you have the pressure from the Brantford Bulldogs. They're seen as the heavy favorite this year, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the Ontario Hockey
Mhm.
League. So with
For sure.
Barrie, they got off to that slow start, but Dylan Smoskowitz, the head coach, was all about you got to win the day, all about the small things, the small details. And eventually the Colts started to get that roll going. And now they're first in the Central Division. The trade deadline, they were 10 points up on both Niagara and North Bay. So all indications were this is a year to maybe go for it because you don't want to just hand the favorites the championship. You want to play the games. So for the Barrie Colts, Marty Williamson deciding to target, another couple of forwards and also to solidify the defense. So they pick up Parker Von Richter and Mason Zabeski from the Brampton
Mhm.
Steelheads. So that's going to be your veteran presence. And then also Ben Wilmot, who was with the London Knights this season. So the Barrie Colts deciding to go all in. They have, the goal of winning the Central Division, and it's going to be fascinating to see how the Eastern Conference plays out because you have Brantford that bought, Ottawa bought in, and then a surprise, the Peterborough Petes picking up Kieran Walton from the Sudbury Wolves. So
Mhm.
Eastern Conference, the top four seems to be solidifying, but then you look at the Western Conference where the Flint Firebirds are. Everyone was talking about Windsor and Kitchener. They were the favorites
Mhm.
coming into this year, and suddenly, Nathan Aspinall signs that contract with the New York Rangers, and it felt like the Firebird season just took a turn, and suddenly they're rolling. And
Mhm.
Mason Bakari, solid in net. Kostov was really picking it up. So, they saw an opportunity. The West was open because Windsor and Kitchener not really running away with it, and picking up Kevin He is a huge pickup. With the Barrie Colts, we've
100%.
seen so much of Kevin He with the Niagara Ice Dogs, just what he's capable of. And he just brings that drive and that energy, that passion. So that's going to be huge for this Flint Firebirds team. If they could win that West Division, I think that should be considered maybe a bit of an upset with how heavy favored the Windsor Spitfires were. And then you also have to keep an eye on the Sioux Greyhounds. Carter George, he's no slouch. He's one of the best
Yep.
goaltenders in the OHL. And those Greyhounds, they're looking to make some noise too. So this is an interesting year. When the London Knights aren't the favorites, suddenly everything seems to be opening up in the West.
Yeah, no kidding. It's definitely surprising too. I kind of took down top five or the divisions rankings and stuff like that, and I'm looking. London's two, so they didn't really. I wouldn't necessarily want to say sell. I mean, I kind of am 50-50 on their trades at the end of the deadline. Um, but when I saw those two go, Woolley and O'Reilly, that told me right there, Kitcher's definitely going all in for another big run, and um, And then, like you had mentioned, Windsor's always, mentioned towards the top and whatnot. And I would agree. Um, I would agree. Flint being a Firebirds fan, I'm not gonna lie, I had my doubts going into the season. And losing to Niagara on opening night was not a good start. But you know, I kind of thinking about it, looking back, when Aspinall signed that entry, his entry level, it kind of started to go off from there, and we've been just, we've had some losses here and there. You're not going to win every single game, but I can agree that's kind of where this run started and whatnot. And Kossoff's been playing lights out. Lombardi's been playing lights out. And it's crazy too with Vicari. I'm looking at the stats or league leaders and stuff like that. Vicari's in the top 10, but he's not even close to. I mean, I think his goals against average. If I click on it now and kind of look at it or whatever, Vicari's seven. They're ranked seventh. I mean, you got Joey Costanzo there at first, there too, with his average. But it's crazy to think of Vicari's having such a standout season, and he's not even ranked in the top five in goals against average. Not even in save percentage, but he's killing it in wins so far. But that tells me it's even not being, or with even being, or not being ranked that high, or not being in the top five or whatever, he's still putting up numbers, and it feels good too, especially after last year and losing Nathan Day, who was lights out, Connor Clattenburg, Blake Smith. Like those are some strong presences on our lines and whatnot. It brought a little bit of force, and I can remember, Flash kind of talk about that at our, fan fest, because my wife and I are season members, and that was one of the first things he mentioned was losing those three: Smith, Clattenburg, and Day, and just losing that strong, presence and whatnot. What was the season going to look like? And uh, getting Kevin He definitely was a good. That was a surprise. I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely a surprise. But uh, kind of like we talked about before we started recording, that was the first sign too. Like, hey, they're going all in, and they want to, kind of like how you alluded to. They're wanting to make their their part. They're trying to make their stamp and presence known, and in the league, and it's going to be a fun run. I'm excited for the end of the season, what this looks like. So then the one thing I'm kind of surprised about too, as far as the West goes, and you know, I'm not gonna lie, it's good to be up, 6-0 in the Cup Series and whatnot. I-75 Cup Series with Saginaw, but losing Misa and Perec definitely was it. You can tell how this season's gone, in that they definitely missed those guys, and I'm kind of curious as to far as what your thoughts are on them trading off, Gervais, and even a one that was even more surprising for me, um, was Nick Sema. Kind of give me your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, the Saginaw Spirit coming into this season, I was really curious to what they would do if they got Perek and Misa back, because obviously those two are the backbone of that team. But what we saw in the playoffs last year against the Erie Otters, the you know the goals against was becoming a glaring issue for the Saginaw Spirit, and they ended up being taken out by Erie in the first round. So coming into this season, it was okay, how's that defense going to look?
Hmm.
Because you can't always outscore your problems. And for the Saginaw
Right.
Spirit, at times that's what it felt like it was becoming, where yes, you've got, some great offensive talents up front with Shilkin and whatnot. And, you've got, for this team, it wasn't really coming together. So I think it was a great, decision here for Drinkle to decide, okay, we're going to sell off our veteran players here because Misa and Prek not coming back. You might as well recoup picks, get younger, and those guys are now going to get a chance playing for their new teams. So Sema going off to the Ottawa 67s, he's going to have that leadership role now with them. And
Hmm.
then with Gervais going off to North Bay, that's also a very young team. So you need those veteran players to help them out. But if you're Saginaw, you've had your good runs, and I think maybe if Misa and Perek came back at the start of the season, maybe this would have been another go for it year with the amount of draft picks they acquired from Kingston last year and those big trades. But
Right.
I think this is probably the right decision with the way the cycles work for junior hockey that Saginaw decided to sell off. But I think if they would have been higher up in the standings, maybe they don't make as many of those trades at this point. But
Hmm.
for Dave Drinkle, one of the top general managers in the Ontario Hockey League, he's done a fantastic job with Saginaw. And I think
Hmm.
he's probably got this, a 4-year plan figured out, and we'll see if the Saginaw Spirit can turn it around as early as next year because they've recouped a ton of draft picks. So if they
Hmm.
can hit it off as early as next season, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about Saginaw as being a surprise at the top of the West Division.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean there. Um, what let me see here. I'm looking. Looks like we got an article here, January 12th, yesterday. What are kind of your thoughts on the top prospects game? Just kind of while I'm got that on the top of my head here, and yeah, about that game and kind of what you're looking forward to coming out of that one.
Well, I think this is a great idea that the OHL is kind of it's like the All-Star game that they used to have, like I think it was about 20 years ago is
Hmm.
when they last had the All-Star games, but now having a chance to showcase your top prospects and bringing them all together, East versus West. It's a great chance for the fans to see the up and coming talent and also to have about, I think we're predicting about 200 scouts are supposed to be in Peterborough Wednesday night for the top prospects game. So I think this is a great way to showcase the talents of the league and also just to, reach out to some of the communities around the Ontario Hockey League. So that's one thing I've noticed of late is how the league's starting to branch out and bring these events to other communities. Because usually we hear about, London's hosting events. We've had
Yep.
Hamilton hosting events, Kitchener. The big markets have hosted these different events. So it's nice to see Brantford last year hosting this, the Connor McDavid Top Prospects game. It's in Peterborough this year. Next year it's going to be in Owen Sound. So it's nice to see that the OHL is kind of, honoring some of the smaller markets. Hopefully Flint, Barrie will be considered in the future as well. And then you also have
Hmm.
the in-person draft coming back for the first time since 2000. And the Kingston Frontenacs get to host that. So I think this is a way for the league to showcase its talents, but also in a way to showcase the communities that they serve. Because for the OHL, it's the smaller cities that really drive the interest, and there's the most passion, I think, in some of those smaller markets compared to the bigger cities
Right.
such as Toronto, for example, where they have a harder time having a team. And I know Brampton's still struggling with attendance and whatnot, but I think this is a great way to go back to your roots, showcase your talented players, and these are the next guys that are going to be drafted in the National Hockey League in June.
Right. Awesome. Awesome stuff. So we kind of talked a little bit about different trades with Flint and stuff like that. Kind of mentioned Barry a little bit here. Um, what are some more of your thoughts about kind of what Barry's thinking about doing because you're kind of you're thought okay you're kind of 50-50, didn't know how it the season could play out really, and they're sitting first spot in the Central Division and stuff. How deep with everything that the Barry has done, how deep of a run can you kind of look into? I hate using that term or thinking that way, like look to the future, look to what's coming, like your next opponent or stuff like that. But kind of what are your thoughts about what kind of run uh, Barry can make here in March once the playoffs start?
Well, I think for the Barrie Colts, I don't want to say it's a guarantee they're going to finish second in the Eastern Conference, but with all indications at the time of recording, it's a double-digit lead between Barrie and North Bay at the moment. But
Yep.
for the Barrie Colts, they're focused on winning that Central Division. Maybe they can catch Brantford or Ottawa. Right now, there's a 5-point gap between those two, but I think for the Barrie Colts, if you can finish, top two, get home ice in the first and second rounds, I think that would be key for this team because if say they finish second, you're
Right.
likely playing a team like the Ottawa 67s in the second round of the playoffs, and they've added players to their roster, so they're going to be better. But I think it's going to come down to the goaltending. Ben Horebic,
Mm.
has been sensational this year. Won back-to-back months of goaltender of the month, back-to-back months. So for the Barrie Colts, it's the back end forward. So
Hmm.
Harabik's the one that's going to be your rock. Even Arvin Jaswal has been phenomenal in net for being a backup goaltender. He
Hmm.
was in goal a couple weeks ago in Kitchener, and the Colts won in Kitchener for the first time since 2020. So
Hmm.
it's been 6 years since they last won in the odds. So, and that was Arvin Jaswal. He stood tall. So for the Colts, the goaltending is what's going to help carry them. They also have the co-captains in Aitchison and Bodwin, who they don't like losing. Even in the preseason games or even in the exhibition scrimmages, these guys want to win. So that's where they've got that drive and they've got good pieces around them. And for the Barrie Colts, I think an Eastern Conference final appearance is a possibility. Although you don't want to go too far ahead because that top four in the Eastern Conference is going to be quite the battle, and it could be Ottawa, it could be Brantford. Either way, I think it's. I wouldn't be surprised if we've got a 7-game series to decide the winner, even in the second round.
Yeah, I can kind of see that too, and how the East is getting a little bit more competitive and whatnot. Now that Brantford's got that, I guess you could say, monkey off their back, and actually once they started losing in their regulation, their own barn and whatnot, um, the East is definitely getting more competitive from what I've noticed. Same kind of question as far as for Flint goes. Kind of what your thoughts is. I mean, you mentioned Kevin He a little bit and how dynamic of a player he is, and I mean really watching all the games, whether it's on Flow Hockey or in person at the Dort. He's definitely art. Kevin He has really made an impact right away. But there are other trades, the other two trades, even before the Kevin He trade with Niagara. We traded for Iggy Pazzi, and then just recently our last one was for Jacob Patega from the Kingston Frontenac. So that one with Patega definitely surprised me a little bit. I didn't really see him kind of coming our way. I was hearing more rumors as far as Walton our way, or even the duo from London, who obviously ultimately went to Kitchener. But kind of your thoughts on the other two big trades that we got with Battaglia and Pazzi, and what's your expectations for Flint's last or run to the end of the season going into the playoffs?
Well, for the Flint Firebirds, when they acquired Pazzi from the North Bay Battalion, it caught me a little off guard because I thought Caden Petrie would be a Firebird right to the end of his junior hockey career. So that one kind of surprised me, but then it made
Yep.
sense because for the North Bay Battalion, they had their eye on Karamov, the 7 foot tall defenseman
Yep.
from Brantford. So they acquired the big defenseman. So you're only allowed to have 3 imports on your roster. So Pazzi was moved out, but he is such a crafty forward. Like he's not the biggest guy, but he can skate. He's got a great vision, and he was always a pain for the Barrie Colts every time they played against the North Bay Battalion. And then even for Jacob Battaglia, he hasn't been having the greatest of seasons with the Kingston Frontenacs this season, but last year we saw him in that second round series between Barrie and Kingston. And Battaglia, he's got hands and he's
Hmm.
got the vision, he's got the sense. The thing for him is, I think Kingston didn't have as much depth, so he was being shut down by the top defensive units on the other teams. But now that you're in Flint and you add all these pieces, the Firebirds have more depth. So their top
Yep.
six pretty strong right now the way it is. So you can change up those lines and try and spread out the scoring a little bit here for the Flint Firebirds. And I think that's exactly what they were thinking with
Yep.
making these trades is going all in. You're sitting top spot right now in the West Division. It's up for grabs. I think it may have been different if, say, Windsor was running away with the West Division. Maybe
Right.
Flint isn't as aggressive at their trade deadline, but they saw an opportunity and they went for it. And, it took Windsor a little bit to finally make their moves. Obviously, it's a huge trade picking up Villeneuve and Ferrand from Sudbury and then Fibiger from Brampton. Like, those are big pieces. So it's an arms race, or it became an arms race at the top of the Western Conference. And it almost seems like the Flint Firebirds may have sparked a bit of that arms race because you see Kevin He
Yep.
coming over, and suddenly Kitchener gets that deal done with the London Knights. Windsor does their moves, and then George up to Sault Ste. Marie. So I think I'm it's probably going to be a photo finish basically to decide who's going to take home that West Division. I don't think Flint's going to give it up easy, and Windsor is just going to battle right to the end. I think Sault Ste. Marie is a little too far back to catch Flint and Windsor, so they'll probably be in that fourth seed, and then Kitchener would win the Midwest, so they'll finish second. So for Flint, finishing first would be ideal because then you have home ice right through to the Western Conference Final. And
Yep.
but if you do finish third, you'll probably have a date with Kitchener in the second round. And boy, oh boy, that would be a heavyweight tilt if we saw Flint Kitchener in that second round.
Hmm. Oh yeah, no, 100%. And it's kind of funny. I was the other night. That would be a good solid second round, and kind of where this everything's sitting right now as far as standings go in our side of the league. Brian kind of talked about it in, his pregame chat. I forget what game it was, but my wife and I stayed back to the kid. We watched it and listened to him, and we were looking at it. If it were to end now and we start the playoffs tomorrow night, you know, we would get Saginaw right off the bat, just kind of how it's sitting there. So, kind of the thoughts depending on how the bracket shook out. You know, obviously any game, any series of Saginaw is always a tough tilt, no matter what the score is, no matter what the records are. It's always tough. You know, the last game with Saginaw, we had a big old fight at the end of the game. Final whistle blew, we won. There's a big fight. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And Kitchener right off the bat in second round would be tough, and then I don't know how it would shake out and whatnot, but to kind of have the thought or feeling of going from Saginaw to Kitchener, and then you possibly have, maybe a Windsor or even a Sioux, kind of like a. They're not like you said. They're a little far back maybe, but they could be. It kind of made it kind of come off as like you're kind of labeling Sioux as the kind of a dark horse, which I kind of like that little take, and whatnot. So it definitely I can agree with you there, Mike. The Western Conference. It's not an obvious pick or thought, as what it was preseason. So it definitely could be a photo finish. I can agree with that. Kind of last thing I wanted to chat with you about is the different scoring leaders, around the league. I'm looking right at the league leaders, players, goalies, stuff like that. We already kind of talked about the goalie side of things, but as far as players go, I'm looking at points, looking at goals, I'm looking at assists, and the one name that stands out in all three of those categories is, of course, Nathan Aspinall. Brian, when I interviewed him a while back, he mentioned the same thing as far as like how, his gameplay has picked up drastically, and again, we already mentioned it, a couple times, but when he signed his entry level with, the Rangers and whatnot, kind of how that gave him that spark, that edge, kind of grit that he needs and whatnot to lead this team as the captain. But what are your thoughts on Aspinall's play so far leading up to, this point of the season?
Well, you're right. I'd agree because I think the New York Rangers signing, I don't know if it was just that added confidence that now he's got that deal with a professional hockey club that he was able to take that next step. But the guy's got the size, he's got the hands, and he's not afraid to just drive the net. So for
Nope.
Nathan Aspinall, just the way he plays and how he's been carrying the Flint Firebirds in that first half of the season,
Yep.
I think he's got to be one of the favorites for the Red Tilson for MVP. Because every team
Ooh.
puts forward
Ooh.
their nominee, and I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if Aspinall got several votes. Because if it's not Aspinall, I don't know who else you would pick as the MVP for the Ontario Hockey League because he's been on an amazing run. I can't wait to see him in person when the Flint Firebirds come up to Barrie and just to see him and just see how much he's grown because you look at his stats from previous seasons. This year's been leaps and bounds better than what he's had previously in
100%.
his OHL career. And maybe if it wasn't for Aspinall having the surge in points, would we be talking about the Flint Firebirds as a buyer at the OHL trade deadline? Because who else would fill that spot with the goal scoring? So I
Right.
think he's got to be your MVP.
I can kind of agree that too. And Another person that kind of came to mind as far as, you kind of started talking about how, his stats numbers, comparing this year to, seasons past, how it's, like you said, leaps and bounds. I I mean, I would say I think they maybe would be buyers. I'd be 50-50 on that. And I say it that way because of another player that kind of jumps out to me. And as far as like numbers, comparing, stats and numbers from seasons past and then this year and how he's been playing or how they've been playing. The first player that came to mind there on your last little take was Jimmy Lombardi. And he's another one of those guys that signed his, entry level with, the LA Kings and whatnot. And I'm saying it loud enough, and my wife hears me and is saying Jimmy because that's her favorite player, on our, our team. So, and honestly, Jimmy is one of the, the nicest, just a side note too, is just how Jimmy is as a person and really just how a lot of not just, I mean, obviously I have more interaction and whatnot with, the team here in Flint, but it kind of seems to me, I mean, depending on where you're at time, if it's not during the game, a lot of the guys league wide are pretty good, outstanding people and whatnot. And when my wife and I were finally able to bring our son home, first game back, they lost, but I ran into Jimmy. He recognized me, and I asked him to record a small little "Hey, congrats" video for my wife, and he did. Charlie Murata did the same
Awesome.
thing. So, um, but no, kind of your thoughts on how Jimmy's play. He signed that like I mentioned his deal with the LA Kings, and I even asked him too, what's it look like with Michigan and whatnot. And obviously, he can't, go the NCAA ranks anymore just, from signing that entry level, which is, you know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all these rules and stuff, but, OHL and NCAA and all that stuff. But kind of your thoughts on Jimmy's play so far this season.
Well, I think for the Flint Firebirds, you can't, teach chemistry. And I think the chemistry of this group is what's really helping carry this team. And, we talked about
Agreed.
Aspinall, but yeah, you're right. Lombardi is another guy he's a great glue for this offensive group. And it seems as though, whatever it is it the signings? Is it just, the coaching? Is it the system? Something I think in this group just clicked. And
Yep.
I was talking to Brian Gardner earlier today, and he was saying too that it's the team, and they're he's never seen them this close before, and I think it's guys like Lombardi who are great both on and off the ice, and it translates into that success. So for this Flint Firebirds team, it's almost as if they're becoming a stronger family and feeding off of one another. And you're
Mhm.
even seeing that with some of the other depth guys, and that's
Yep.
going to rub off on the future players that are coming up the ranks. So you want to create that that atmosphere, that environment that's very positive and a winning culture, and you're starting to see that a little bit, and it usually starts with guys like Lombardi, and you like I said, you can't teach that. It's just this is coming naturally, and I think this is all positive for the Flint Firebirds going forward.
Yep. Agreed. And I forget where it was I heard it. Just recent videos that Brian's posted on the Firebirds YouTube page and Facebook and whatnot. Um, I would agree. Having I know there's a video that he did with Jimmy or a little small interview with Jimmy earlier in the season. How him and Aspinall have been roommates, have been close ever since they arrived in Flint, and this core group. I mean, they've been together for the most part for quite a while, and it feels like with some of the guys like Battaglia, and even Vicari, like the new guys that we brought in this year, they've played together, whether it's on the same team or against each other, prior to to their OHL careers. And so I think, it's hard. I can see it being hard sometimes too to create that chemistry as far as, it's there's I mean, you could say it's something, somewhat to a degree. It's kind of high turnover. And as far as you're not, you really don't know what the team's going to look like from year in, year out, kind of like you mentioned. Like,
Yeah.
and so everything can be changed and different. But it seems like because a lot of these guys whether they've been playing together in Flint for so long, or they played together, like I mentioned before their OHL career started. They already knew each other. They had that kind of like chemistry set, built in and what. So it was really just an easy transition for these new guys coming in this year. And man, it's really been exciting to see how they've been working together. Compared to last year especially. So, um, any other kind of last minute thoughts as far as who's kind of stood out to you as far as between both our teams, Barrie and Flint, and yeah, kind of just who else has kind of stood out to you, and then just for fun because we've got our first meeting on Thursday night, and then our second one on the 30th, I believe. Can you give me your thoughts on other standouts for both our teams, and kind of what's your prediction, if you can share, coming on Thursday or for Thursday on the 30th?
For predictions, I have no idea which way these two games are going to go because I think these two teams match up so well. And we already
I would
touched on
agree.
the goaltending for Barrie. Ben Horebic has been a standout. Mason Vakari's been outstanding as well this year. So these two teams match up very evenly. And as a broadcaster, I I try not to say the word overtime because you know I have a job that I got to do in the morning. So I
Fair.
wouldn't be surprised though if these games are a one goal game or maybe a game with an empty netter. I think it's going to be tooth and nail between these two clubs because it is a measuring stick. These are two
Yep.
teams that are competing at the top of their conferences, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see, guys like Cole Emerton for the Barrie Colts. He's a younger defenseman, but we're starting to see him gain confidence. So he's going to be a player to keep an eye out on the back end. And then even for the Flint Firebirds, we haven't even really talked about uh, you know, Murata, the young guy,
Yep.
the forward there. I think he's a guy that's going to really take that step. And I know there's teams that were interested in trading for him at the trade deadline, and
Yep.
I think it's a great thing the Flint Firebirds kept him because if you trade away him, well, then that's going to be a future asset lost, and some
Yep.
teams have a hard time recovering after trading away a first round pick. So keep an eye on some of these younger guys because they're the ones that they can put in that one goal that's going to maybe put the team over the edge. So yes, they've both teams have the big weapons, but I think this is a type of game where you're going to see someone that's going to take that next step in their development, and it could be one of these younger players.
Yeah. No, I can kind of agree, especially with Charlie. It's he started off pretty good, and then he went and played with Team Canada and whatnot, and for a couple weeks there, and then when he came back, it was kind of like a slow start for him, kind of getting his feet back wet in the OHL kind of play. But just recently within the last week, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. He was rookie of the week for the OHL league wide, and I do like his style of play, and he's starting to get a little more playing time. And you kind of mentioned it too, as far as a little bit ago, as far as how Flash can tinker with all different lineups every night. It's not the same cut and dry kind of lineup. It's except for maybe the top a top line of Aspinall, Lombardi and Anderson, which I do like Anderson's style play as well, being a Michigan
Mhm.
native and all that too. Except for maybe those three, the second, third, fourth lines, it's all been shifted and whatnot. And it's really cool to see how Flash can shift these guys in and out, healthy scratches, whatnot, and the same level of play is still there, regardless of who's in and who's out. And everyone can have great nights, off nights. It's just that's human nature, but it's kind of cool to see like you had mentioned how different lineups, the different lineups that Flash can work with. So um, yeah, man, I'm pretty excited. I'm really happy we got to do this. So um, looking forward to the Thursday night, and looking forward to hopefully catching up with you in Flint on the 30th.
Well, I'll keep an eye out for you, and it'll be my first time doing a broadcast out of Flint, so I may be looking for directions at some point. So it's great that doing this, and all the best with your young family.
I appreciate that, Mike. All right, guys. I'm Chris with the Perch Report. We'll see
Every
you guys
star will
soon.
build my friend.